This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have landed smack dab in the middle of Creep Street.
Welcome.
As always, follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We even have a TikTok.
We sure do.
If also on our Facebook, there's another forum called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page, where daily we like to interact with our listeners, post articles, memes, funny things like that. Everyone is welcome to join. Just find it, click the Let Me In button, and one of us will let you in.
That's right.
Also, of course, if once a week is not enough, and let's face it, you folks are all creep heads.
Yeah, you guys are creep heads, and you know what? There isn't a cure.
You're addicted to that creep amphetamine. You know what I mean? And there's no cure except just getting more, baby.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you want more, you go to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast, where we got all sorts of goodies, from movie commentaries to rankings of franchises to complete bonus episodes.
That's right.
Very fun stuff. But good golly, Maureen, if spring isn't already in the air.
It's sprung a touch.
Now, it's not officially spring yet. That comes later in the month. Mm-hmm. And of course, especially in our part of the world, we're still going to probably get snow. There's going to still be cold days and stuff. But we're getting those first few glimpses of spring. It hit like 70 the other day. Degrees.
Yes,
yeah.
It was crazy.
And so we're feeling good. We're getting that pep, that springtime pep in our step.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well. I think a good pep in the step. It's just the end is coming, you guys. When it comes to winter, you know, we're getting through it.
That's right.
We are prevailing. We are persevering.
That's right.
And we're hot.
Well, Maureen, I think I've tiptoed around the subject long enough.
Yeah. Well. So what did we do last week again?
Cursed painting.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Cursed paintings was a scary one, folks.
It was creepy to research.
Uh-huh.
And it plays, like I said, it plays into that cheap little mechanism of, not even just owning the painting, but just looking at it online.
You're like, fuck. And you know that it's not
And you know
real,
you're probably going to be safe, but it's like,
But it's in your head the rest of the day, and you're just like, oh my God. I mean, like earlier today, I accidentally saw that crying boy painting. I saw it on YouTube. It just like popped up.
Yeah, because it's probably in our algorithm now.
And and I just was like, fuck.
Right. Props to, we've had a few of our listeners reach out to make sure we were okay.
Oh, yes. Thank you, everybody.
Including the awfully awesome Annie. She reached out, just wanted to make sure we were okay after doing all that spooky research.
That's right.
And we are. Thank you, Annie. But, ooh, if last week wasn't enough, this one is going to make your blood run cold.
This is a little bit of a different vein of the paranormal, of the unexplained, of the weird, of the monsters. This is a little bit going more towards monster or ghost, but also history a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Just kind of learning about another culture.
Absolutely. For sure.
This is a well-rounded, well-bodied episode. You know what I'm saying?
Ooh, let it breathe.
I mean, this episode's got legs.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Banshees.
Good golly, Miss Molly.
Now, banshees are about, on a good day, about 55 pounds.
Walk on all fours.
Eat and drink out of bowls.
Yep.
They require to be pottied, to be walked.
Yep.
Wait, hold on a second.
Wait a second. Did you just do research into our dog?
I did research into the wrong banshee.
Oh my gosh.
For Christ's sakes.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. But for real though, in case you didn't know, we have a dog named Banshee.
Yes.
And gosh darn it, if she is not the best dog in the entire freaking world.
But not the subject of today's episode.
Yes.
Not the best things in the whole world. Not someone you want to cuddle up to on the couch like our Banshee.
Right. But banshees often get kind of a bad rep, you know? They actually are not these evil or dangerous creatures like we often hear of them being.
Okay.
In movies and TV shows. But before I get all wet and wild here,
Please.
let me list off my sources. One, we had a fantastic video called The Messed Up Origins of Banshees by John Solo. Then we have a Creep Street favorite, Dr. Emily Zarka with the Monstrum channel and her video Banshee, Ireland's Screaming Harbinger of Death. And Bizarre Encounters with Real Banshees by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe.
Freaky deaky, my friends.
That's right. Banshees are a cool thing that I think a lot of people maybe don't know that much about. Like a lot of people, I'm sure, have heard the phrase or have said the phrase themselves, screamed like a banshee.
Yes. Just shows you how things get passed down and you don't even necessarily know the story behind it.
Yes, exactly. But yes, banshees are a mythical being or ghost or fairy, however you decide to think about it, coming out of Ireland. So this is taking us back over, across the pond, and we are just so happy to be here in Ireland, baby. This is one I have been familiar with the term banshee, also just from hearing the phrase screamed like a banshee, but also my family line runs back to Ireland.
Right.
So just culturally, I was more aware of it as well. Banshees have been shown in the media and throughout specifically American culture, in a lot of different ways. Like it's been on an episode of Teen Wolf. There was an episode about banshees, or at least one episode on banshees on Supernatural, things like that show banshees as being kind of this evil or dangerous entity.
Right.
Which, kind of I mentioned before, it is really not actually that way. A banshee is a little bit up for interpretation because some people say that a banshee is a fairy or a type of fairy, and some people say that a banshee is the ghost of a woman who actually died.
Okay.
I am more inclined to believe that she is the ghost of a woman who actually lived and died.
Okay.
Because for a few reasons that will become clearer as I go on, but the idea of her being a fairy is very interesting too, and maybe that is the case, and maybe it's both. You know? I don't know.
Who knows?
But the reason why I'm a little more inclined to believe banshees are ghosts is because the original word or the original two words meaning banshee are banshee, and it's B-E-A-N space S-I with a accent on it.
Okay.
I don't know if that has a real letter. Sorry to those if I fucked that up. But that originally meant fairy woman, but it seems like even before that meant fairy woman, and when the actual term for banshee was given, that meant woman of the underworld.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
Right. So it makes sense why a lot of people think that it means fairy woman, because it does mean fairy woman, but apparently before then it meant woman of the underworld.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the name itself has undergone remodeling.
Yeah. A person could become a banshee for many reasons, but usually it's because of some injustice that they experienced in death or during their life at some point. But being a banshee also, I don't think, is really a bad thing. It's not like you're necessarily punished with being a banshee or something like that. Even though it seems like it would be. It's not. What banshees do, for those of you who may not know, is they are known for their scream or their moan or their crying, but specifically their screaming. and they appear to the living to warn about an impending death in the family. And what they look like are either two different ways. One is like a withered old crone, and the other is a tall, thin, beautiful woman, and both have long, flowing hair and are often described as dressed in all white or having a gray cloak. Now, even though she's mainly known for screaming and clapping and moaning, essentially just making a lot of noise, often she has been said to be able to sing very beautifully.
Oh.
Yes, but singing very sad songs, but very beautiful songs at the same time.
Interesting. Okay. This is something I did not know.
Yes. Now, I always kind of thought that a banshee could just appear to anyone. If you saw a banshee crying, that meant someone you knew was going to die. Not necessarily you, but someone you knew was going to die.
Right.
And that experience could really happen to anyone. Apparently, that's not the case, Creep Street.
Well, good golly.
Banshees are only devoted to certain people, and they are devoted to the ancestors of the ancient Celtic nobility. And that is usually people whose last name starts with O, Mick, or Mac. And it's believed, too, that banshees were ancestors of this family as well. The family that she was there to protect and to warn was the family that she herself was from in life.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like anyone could just happen upon a banshee.
Right.
It would only appear to you if it was your family's banshee and the banshee wanted you to see it.
I see. Okay.
So it's not like if you happened to see a banshee, like I used to think of it as like, oh, does that mean if you just see a banshee, that means someone in your family is going to die? It's like, no, it's not like if you just saw a banshee out in the wild, that wouldn't mean anything. That's not how it works. But just so in case of some people were thinking of it like that.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
It's not like seeing a banshee itself is what causes a death in the family to happen.
Right.
She's just there to let you know about it.
Right.
And banshees were so specific to the family that they even were a symbol of their family as well. Like the English came over and took over some people's stations, like their noble titles.
I see what you mean. Okay.
They would not get the person's banshee.
Oh, so it was purely to the bloodline.
The bloodline, yeah. It doesn't go along with who is royal or whatever at the time. So just based off of the banshee, it's a pretty fair assessment to say that women played a huge part in Irish death culture. And that isn't just by accident. That goes back way, way long ago. There was an ancient Celtic battle goddess named Catabadva, and she's also known as Bive. And Bive is the southeastern Irish name for banshee.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of different names depending on where you are for banshee. Banshee's just the most common one.
And just a quick blanket statement, there's a lot of these names and titles are original Celtic or Gaelic or...
Right.
So we're obviously probably not going to know how to pronounce some of these, so we apologize, of course.
Yeah, I was going to take Gaelic lessons when I was in high school because this boy I liked was going to do it, but then I didn't.
Yeah.
So this ancient Celtic goddess called Catabadva, she would influence battles and predict the deaths of notable warriors by a loud wailing cry. Sound familiar?
Goodness, okay.
She could also turn into a crow, which some banshees are said to be able to do as well. Also, there was another goddess called Brigid, and she was said to be the first to cry and lament a death, which was that of her son. So these two stories further show the connection between women and crying and death, but there's another aspect of the Irish death culture that even connects the women to death even more, and that is the act of keening. Keening is basically just a very intense traditional form of crying, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, keening is the rhythmic wailing and mourning performed by women. it was necessary for the dead to be able to pass safely on to the other world or onto the next world. So it clearly was a very important position, and it was a professional position.
Yeah.
People actually got paid to keen.
Yeah, and you can find variations of this throughout all cultures in history.
Right.
All over throughout the rest of Europe, the Middle East, like this, it maybe not as called keening or done the exact same way, but
right.
variations of that. But yeah, you're like you said, it was a career. Like if you had a lot of money, say you were a royal or you just were just had a lot of money, you could pay to have the best keeners at your, in a funny way, it's almost like you're having a crooner sing for your, but you're having a keener.
You're having a keener.
You're having a keener. Like, I want someone who, when you need someone to weep, you go for the best.
You go for the best of the best.
Yes.
And that's Marianne. So yes, these keening women were seen as the link between two worlds, and another name for Banshee is Bonquincha, and that means keening woman.
Okay.
So these women, even though they were very well respected and very important women to society, they also were kind of outsiders at the same time because they were actually able to really live out all of the aspects of grief that maybe other people weren't afforded the same ability to be able to do. They were kind of like professional grievers. And sometimes they would have unkempt hair, they'd walk around barefoot. Sometimes they were paid in alcohol. So many of them became alcoholics, which was just kind of another way that made them even more outside the community.
Right.
But their connections with banshees, I think, are just so fascinating. Like that they are able to cry and mourn and lament a death like banshees do. Keeners, it was a paid position. So the best of the best would go to the noble families, and sometimes, it was only the nobility that could have a banshee in the first place.
Wow.
So that kind of makes sense why keening people going along with banshees, it just kind of goes together in that way. The last real professional keener was around until the 1960s, actually, and we have a recording of this woman. Her name is Bridget Mullen, and here is a recording.
Oh, no, oh, no, oh, no.
That was a Patti Smith song. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God.
No, but for real, that was a professional keening session.
Yes.
Now, the name of that name, because I found it on YouTube, and it has a specific track name.
Right.
I cannot I won't even do it the injustice of trying to pronounce it.
Right.
But yeah.
Right, because these keening women wouldn't just cry and scream. They also would sing these specific songs, kind of like this weep sing combination.
Right. And if you listened in just the clip we just played, it's kind of, there is a sing-songy element to it, but it sounds like she was also saying just, oh no,
right.
Oh no. But I can't tell for sure. She might be saying something in Gaelic or...
Yeah, if anyone knows, please reach out and let us know. Now, keening was like Dylan mentioned before, how there's variations of this all over the world. Well, keening was a common practice in Wales and Scotland too. And in Wales and Scotland, they also have their own version of the banshee, which just shows you there's another connection between keening women and banshees.
Right.
In Scotland, they have the little washerwoman who is seen washing blood-stained clothes or armor of those about to die. In Wales, they have the cahure, which is a disembodied voice that wails and moans to signal a person's death.
It's funny you mentioned that, because as I was doing research, because obviously later in this episode we'll have actual banshee sightings and banshee encounter stories.
Yeah.
I was looking around and I found this collection of ones that had apparently taken in the southwestern United States.
Oh.
But when I read them, they all sounded a lot like La Llorona.
Oh.
And it even says that in the article, and it made me go, even though she's different in many ways,
Right.
She's also very similar in that her wailing usually signifies someone's about to die.
Right. Usually all dressed in white.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, well, what if this is all the same thing? It's just different cultures have named it different things and given it different attributes. But maybe it's the same spirit that these different cultures over the generations have encountered.
That's fascinating. Now, here's another theory for maybe some part of this that could be going on. Barn owls.
Barn owls, baby.
Now, barn owls, they are endangered in Ireland now, but they used to be plentiful. They used to be all over the place. And barn owls are nocturnal, obviously, and they have a really horrifying screeching sound that really, really sounds like a human being screaming.
Oh, yeah.
Or like a woman screaming.
Yeah.
Dylan.
Let's give the people a taste.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it.
There you have it.
A real scream queen.
Yeah, yikes. You could say that much.
Was that a barn owl or was that Jamie Lee Curtis?
Oh, come on.
But, it's funny, we mentioned it briefly, but in our Flatwoods Monster episode, but the Flatwoods Monster, a barn owl was also one of the quote-unquote rational theories of what it could be, or quote-unquote,
right.
More so like the look, I don't know. That one was a little harder for me to buy. Right. In that regard. But I could understand why, if you didn't see a woman, if you were just out but you heard that screech,
you might think that was just someone screaming.
Because, under the right kind, I could see myself believing that was a person screaming under the right.
Yeah.
I'd certainly not stick around to see what the fuck it was.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
So, Dylan, will you please let us know about these Banshee sightings?
Of course. Well, one of the most well-known Banshee encounters is said to have happened in the early 1900s, I think even the year 1900 specifically, to a family living in Cork, Ireland. The story was told in the book True Irish Ghost Stories, and one of the surviving family members told of the encounter. My mother, when a young girl, was standing looking out of the window in their house at Blackrock near Cork. She suddenly saw a white figure standing on a bridge which was easily visible from the house. The figure waved her arms toward the house, and my mother heard the bitter wailing of the Banshee. It lasted some seconds, and then the figure disappeared. Next morning, my grandfather was walking as usual into the city of Cork. He accidentally fell, hit his head against the curbstone, and never recovered consciousness. In March 1900, my mother was very ill, and one evening, the nurse and I were with her, arranging her bed. We suddenly heard the most extraordinary wailing, which seemed to come in waves around and under her bed. We naturally looked everywhere and tried to find the cause, but in vain. The nurse and I looked at one another, but made no remark, as my mother did not seem to hear it. My sister was downstairs sitting with my father. She heard it and thought some terrible thing had happened to her little boy, who was in bed upstairs. She rushed up and found him sleeping quietly. My father did not hear it. In the house next door, they heard it and ran downstairs, thinking something had happened to the servant. But the latter at once said to them, "Did you hear the Banshee? Miss P must be dying." So even the neighbors heard it, but certain folks in the house didn't.
Weird. Yeah, that is creepy.
Very creepy.
Oh, very bizarre.
Well, another story is mentioned in that same book that happened in the year 1894. This encounter happened to a boy at a boarding school, and this is apparently what happened. A few years ago, a curious incident occurred in a public school in connection with belief in the Banshee. One of the boys, happening to become ill, was at once placed in a room by himself where he used to sit all day. On one occasion, as he was being visited by the doctor, he suddenly started up from his seat and affirmed that he heard somebody crying. The doctor, of course, who could hear or see nothing, came to the conclusion that the illness had slightly affected his brain. However, the boy, who appeared quite sensible, still persisted that he heard someone crying, and furthermore said, "It is the Banshee, as I have heard it before." The following morning, the headmaster received a telegram saying that the boy's brother had been accidentally shot dead.
Oh, God.
How awful is that? Good God.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now, this next story happened back in the 1940s in the town of Bogside, Northern Ireland. From what I could tell from my sources, I guess Bogside is actually, from what I understand, is a neighborhood on the outskirts of Derry, Northern Ireland.
Shout out one of our favorite shows, Derry Girls.
We love Derry Girls. We get it like a year too late over here, of course, so it takes a while till we actually get it. But we cannot wait for the next season.
Yes,
we are big fans of Derry Girls. Well, a woman there claimed her grandfather and one of his sons had this experience. Her grandfather had been experiencing a really bad toothache, but had refused to go see a dentist about it. One evening, his son was out for whatever reason, just going for a walk or whatever, when he heard a wailing sound coming from down the street. And down the street, he saw a figure hunched over, and at first he thought that it was a child crying. But as he got closer, he found out that it was a very old woman that the source describes as hideous and wizened.
Oh.
Right as he got close to the woman, she let out an awful shriek and vanished. The son knew that what he saw must have been a banshee, and he rushed home and pleaded with his father to go see a dentist, but he died before he could. Damn.
That'll teach you. I gotta go to the dentist. Fuck.
I know, right? I do too. Now, here's one from a poster on Reddit. She told a story that her mother had relayed to her about an encounter with a banshee, and this is what she said.
Some people believe in banshees, and only some families get them. I live in Ireland. My mother comes from a very old Irish family with written history going back centuries. They get visited by paranormal spirits in numerous ways, but one of those is a banshee. She had heard about them, like when her uncle died and her father was visited that night. It first visited her after she got married. In the middle of the night, it started wailing at the top of the stairs at her bedroom. My father got up and noticed the bedroom door ajar. He went out to the stairs and caught a glimpse of it before it disappeared and the wailing stopped. Before morning, she got a phone call. Her father had died. I believe it's appeared twice more over the years. The last time, in January this year, as she walked her dog, a howl came from nearby. She knew what it was and ran back home. Our very close friend and neighbor dropped dead suddenly the next morning. Most don't believe it, and it seems people don't get these death warnings anymore, so most joke about it. I'm a naturally skeptical person about anything, but in our family, even the mention of a banshee will send a shiver up our spine. We don't question it, and we don't joke about it.
Well, there you go.
Don't question, don't joke. I mean, that's a pretty scary story.
Pretty freaky. Here's another one from the web. This was posted on the website Your Ghost Stories. A woman talks about her family's experience with a banshee when she was a young girl living over in Ireland. And here's her story, or here's an excerpt from her story.
As a child, I remember my grandmother telling me that my grandfather had taken ill in the back room of their house. She was attending him when she heard a loud banging on the front door and left my grandfather to go answer it. She told me that as she approached the door, she could hear a sobbing noise coming from outside, but on opening the door, there was no one on the other side. She immediately went back to my grandfather, finding him stone dead in the bed. Now fast forward to November 2001, I was in my grandmother's house. She had only been given a few days to live, and my father thought it was a good idea to come out and say my last goodbyes. Rather unfortunately, she was going through a slow, painful death. I remember going to her bedroom and feeling very cold. I knew that the few days were more realistically a matter of hours at the most. As my grandmother's breathing became more shallow, my dad said it was probably better that I sit in the front room. He called my aunt's boyfriend and asked him to come and pick me up. While I was waiting, I heard a knock on the door. I assumed it was my aunt's boyfriend. As I approached the door, I could hear crying. As I touched the lock to open the door, I suddenly felt a chill down my spine. There was no one there. Almost instantaneously, I heard a mixture of prayers and sobbing coming from the back room. I knew she was gone. As I closed the door, I saw a glimpse of what can only be described as a tall, thin woman sitting, crying on the neighbor's wall. experience has stayed with me forever.
Wow. And that was another thing we found out in our research a lot, was the whole idea of knocking on the door and no one being there.
Yes. Oh, that's spooky.
Freaky, right? Well, on that same website, another woman in Ireland told of her experience while she was out in the countryside. She was out for a walk to unwind when something in the distance caught her eye, and it appeared to be a woman with white hair dressed in a long, flowing white dress. She was standing at the side of the river and appeared to be washing something, but the closer the witness got, she realized that what she was washing appeared to be rags soaked in blood. And every time she dipped them into the water of the river grew red to the point of crimson.
Oof.
And here's what she says happened next.
At first, I was rather annoyed that there was a stranger on our property, and almost called out to ask what she was doing here trespassing. Then a freezing chill hit me. It surrounded me, and it felt like the coldness of death. There was not a sound, no birds sang, not a leaf rustled. I continued to watch the woman in spite of the fact that fear was creeping up my spine like a sack full of spiders. She seemed to be young, but I could not really tell for certain because I could not see her face, and she seemed to be very sad. Then, to my amazement, she vanished before my eyes, fading like a mist. I sat there dumbfounded for a moment, and the realization hit me that I had seen some kind of a ghost. I was still feeling that freezing cold, and even though it was around 80 degrees, I was shivering. I decided that I'd had enough contemplation at my quiet spot for today, and ran back to the house, my mind racing crazily with what I had seen.
Good golly gracious.
Good golly gracious indeed.
Well, as we talked about earlier, Maureen, it seems that the Banshee, it's not so much about borders.
Right.
It's about the bloodline, right? So these things have been known to travel sometimes with a family.
Okay.
These next couple stories apparently took place in New York.
Oh.
This first one in New York City, this was back in the 1950s, a family that had moved from Ireland to New York City, and it seems that their Banshee came along with them. Here's what the witness said.
I was standing next to my bedroom window. We lived in an apartment that was on the 5th floor. The window faced out into the alleyway. It was dusk when the crying started. First, it sounded like a newborn or a cat crying. Now, I knew my neighbors and did not know any of them that had a newborn, but it was an alleyway, so I thought it was probably a cat. But the crying changed into a young child crying or sobbing, and it was the saddest cry I had ever heard. I tried to lift up my window to call out to the person crying. I thought it was Tommy Cavanaugh next door. I yelled out because I could not see anything because there was no light and it was dark by now. There was no answer, just crying. I yelled out, "Tommy, is that you? Are you okay? Do you need help?" No answer, just more crying. The sobbing changed again to a woman's sobs. Again, heartbreak-sounding sobs coming from an unknown source. My mom came into my room and the crying stopped. I said to my mom, "Don't you hear that crying? It sounds like someone is really hurt." She said, "I don't hear anything." She was in the living room. The apartment was not that big. She should have heard the crying. She looked at me very funny and shook her head. When she left the room, the crying started. This was not a crying that was from someone being physically hurt. This was a crying that someone was just told the worst news possible and her heart was broken. That's the only way I can describe it. The crying stopped and I went about my business. 3 days later at 5:30 in the morning, my father's sister called to tell him their sister Kathleen died. She had leukemia.
Wow, right?
Oh, that's so sad.
Once again, here's what I want to know. I get, okay, some people can hear it, some can't. You would think maybe it's because she had her father's blood and her mother didn't. She was married to him. Maybe it had to do with the blood. Like, why? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. But yeah, maybe that is what it is.
And as we know, even if you weren't born in Ireland, like we said, it seems like Irish descendants were followed by this Banshee. This is another story from New York, one that was posted on the website Your Ghost Stories. And she says she's never actually experienced it herself, but this is what she says of her family's experiences.
See, every woman in my family has experienced the cry of the Banshee, except me. Apparently there's an awful howling that just radiates through the entire house, and even outside, that is so loud and terrifying, it makes you want to flee. It's supposed to be the Banshee howling over someone's soon-to-be demise, from what she told me. My great-grandmother, grandmother, and mother have all experienced it at some point in their life. When my mother experienced hers, she was home alone at the time, and she said it was almost like a horrible wolf howling, and it was so loud, and in any room of the house it seemed to follow you. She told me how she went throughout the house, the basement, even outside to try and find where it was coming from. Finally, after an hour or so, right before my grandmother came home, it stopped. My mom waited outside for her, terrified, and explained to my grandma what happened. My grandmother was very calm about the whole situation and explained to her how our family is cursed with the cry of the Banshee. A few days later, my great-grandmother died.
Wow.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Wow. What a, but yeah, I that's why I wonder when we hear about these other stories, if maybe this is a certain type of entity that different cultures have just...
Right, their own versions of.
Right, absolutely.
That's fascinating. Let us know what you all think. Have you had any experiences of banshees? Does your family have a banshee story? Do you think that these things are all over the world, but this is just the Irish version of it? I don't know. You let us know. Feel free to reach out to us in any of our social medias or email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com.
Maureen, thank you for doing all of that exquisite research.
Dylan, thank you.
Let me, I want to scream a few names.
Oh, please, baby. You know I love it when you do.
I'm going to be screaming a few names right now. Citizens of the Milky Way, our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish face Via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, and the Evil Elizabeth Riley.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for reading off those righteous and true names. If you want to be like them and check out what we have to offer on our Patreon, feel free to check out patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. We've got all sorts of bonus content on there, starting at just only $2 a month. We highly recommend you check it out.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
A good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.